Good morning and welcome to the third annual symposium hosted by the South Carolina Department on Aging, Columbia International University, and the South Carolina Respite Coalition. Good morning, everybody. We are so glad that you can be here for our third session of our symposium today. We will start with a word from our governor, Henry McMaster.
I'm delighted that you're having this symposium. We have great people in South Carolina. Many of us are out there still striving and working out there in the arena, while we have others who are getting older and are moving over towards the sidelines. It is important that we do all we can to support and honor those who have brought us to this great place where we are today, and to protect the young ones. And I believe that our churches, our communities of faith, are the perfect people to do this great work. So I thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor McMaster, for that special greeting. Today's session of the symposium will focus on ways the faith community can help seniors and caregivers who have become victims of abuse. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the director of the South Carolina Department on Aging, Connie D. Mott.
Good morning. I want to thank you, Kay, and Rachel for organizing the symposium for our faith-based organizations. This is week 3, and today's symposium topic is one our society often feels is taboo and may shy away from wanting to discuss, but the reality is exploitation is among our older population, and it happens daily. And we need you, our leaders, and your faith-based communities to take what you learned today and put a plan of action in place to ensure that your elderly members among your congregations are not being exploited. The Bible tells us in Psalm 71:9, "Do not cast me off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength is spent." So as you listen today to our presenters, it is our hope that if you have not already done so, that you will begin the conversations with your congregations to protect our aging population when they no longer have the strength or the fortitude to protect themselves. So thank you for taking the time today to join our symposium and learn ways to protect our at-risk, older, vulnerable population from being exploited, abused, or neglected. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Mon. This special symposium is brought to you by the faith-based initiative of the South Carolina Department on Aging. As a part of that initiative, we reach out to people of all faiths, Christians, Jews, Muslims. We reach out to everybody as a part of our faith-based initiative. Now I would like to introduce Cheryl Nail. She is the Vice Chair of the Interfaith Partnership of South Carolina.
As Vice Chair of Interfaith Partners of South Carolina, I commend you for dedicating time to further your knowledge of how to support aging and vulnerable populations in your faith community. A statewide organization, Interfaith Partners of South Carolina, or IPSC, brings together people of diverse religious, spiritual, and secular paths throughout our state to cultivate a more harmonious community. Representing 12 different religious and secular paths, we work in solidarity to cultivate relationships of trust, to protect the religious freedom of all, and to act in service with and for one another. Many of the faith traditions that IPSC represents place emphasis on aging and the wisdom that the elderly possess. My faith, Judaism, is no exception. In the Torah, we learn that it is a mitzvah or a commandment to honor the elderly. It says in Leviticus 19:32, "You shall rise before the aged and show deference to the old." Our midrash, or rabbinical commentary of the Torah, teaches us that, quote, "Everyone who welcomes in an elderly person It is as if he has welcomed in the divine presence. As such, most Jewish organizations, such as the one that I work for, the Columbia Jewish Federation, have programs and services dedicated to our aging demographic. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "A test of a people is how it behaves toward the old. It is easy to love children. Even tyrants and dictators make a point of being fond of children. But the affection and care for the old, the incurable, the helpless, are the true gold mines of a culture." Thank you for being a true gold mine of the culture in our state.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for those wonderful remarks. Now I would like to introduce Rachel Hatton, the Executive Director of the South Carolina Lifespan Coalition.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so honored to partner with the Department of Aging and Columbia International University to present these webinars to you as part of the Faith and Caregiving Symposium 2020. I would like to introduce now Roger Acton. Roger Acton just started his 4th year as a faith-based victim services project director with the South Carolina Victim Assistance Network, along with his assistant project director and community outreach coordinator, connecting all faith communities with the powerful support of all violent crime victim services for victims and their families. In complement to his SCVAN work, Roger, at the beginning of 2020, was appointed by Attorney General Alan Wilson as the subcommittee chair of the new Interfaith Initiative for the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force. Roger is also a part-time chaplain with Marketplace Chaplains, providing ministry support to the staff of multiple businesses in the Midlands as part of their employee benefits. Covering a span of over 25 years, he has enjoyed ministering in Florida, Texas, and South Carolina, including about a year as a hospice chaplain and several years as a volunteer hospital chaplain. Prior to Roger's ministry call, he worked in sales, marketing, plus interspersed retail work with Lifeway Christian Resources while in ministry in South Carolina. With his wife, Kathy, they are celebrating 27 years of marriage and are blessed with 2 awesome collegiate daughters, Micah and Faith. So please welcome Roger Acton.
Thank you so much. That is awesome, Rachel. I really appreciate it. We're honored to be here. I'm going to just in a second show you a slide here. We're just transitioning, it looks like, but this is a privilege that I thank my friend Kay for connecting me with y'all. As you could hear from that descriptive, there is a heart for seniors already between my ministry and between my chaplain work, and then also in my work with folks in the area of hospice, which was a very heart awakening moment. And y'all can see that information. Good. This has given me a heart for now crime victims, working with SCVAN. We are, like she said at the beginning, in our 4th year, and this is a grant type thing. So there's a lot of faith when you work from year to year, watching and seeing. And with the South Carolina Attorney General's Office, we've been honored with the privilege to continue to keep making a difference of having faith collaborating with victim services. But this is not just about me today. You're going to get to meet 3 other good friends of mine that are going to get to share with you. In fact, I'm going to make them blush when I read their information. Let me pull this next slide. And you're seeing them also in their live version. So you tell they gave you some pretty realistic pictures here too. So they're looking pretty good. I'm loving them. And here's the first one I want to share with you. And I'm going to read them in the order you're going to hear, because what we're going to do is after I intro, we're going to have Detective Tim Archeta speak, then Megan Rigabar, and then Tenelle Jones. So let me go ahead and brag on Tim first. Tim Archeta Sr. is a law enforcement victim advocate with the Special Victims Unit of the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, with particular emphasis on vulnerable adults and the elderly population aged 55 and over, with respect to violent and serious crimes that result in physical, sexual, and financial and emotional harm. He is a crisis negotiator and started Project Lifesaver, which is a public safety program of Lexington County Sheriff's Department, designed to locate missing, quote-unquote, at-risk children and adults with special needs who wander. Tim has been married to his wife, Angie, for 47 years. Hey, Angie. And has 2 daughters and a son and 7 grandchildren, and 2 of which were recently adopted from Haiti. Starting in his early 20s, Tim began a lengthy career as a store detective investigator, and corporate loss prevention manager with HC Prang Stores, Shopko Stores, Rich's Department Stores, Toys R Us, and Staples Stores. Tim has conducted internal fraud and theft investigations in many states throughout the eastern half of the U.S. During the same time period, Tim also graduated from Columbia International University and was ordained as a pastor, and most recently serves as associate pastor at First Baptist Church of Columbia, South Carolina, where we connected. And as executive pastor of the Church of the Mall in Lakeland, Florida. Tim enjoys taking RV trips, time with his grandchildren, hunting, fishing, shooting, and teaching and speaking. And most of the time, he enjoys his work. And he is passionate. So I look forward to you getting to know him when he speaks coming up. And then Megan Rigabar. Megan is the Human Trafficking Program Assistant at the South Carolina Office of the Attorney General, where she aids with the creation, development, and implementation of anti-human trafficking initiatives in the state level. Prior to joining the Office of the Attorney General, Megan was a disruption strategist fellow with Polaris, where she served as the pilot researcher to analyze nearly 600 illicit messages businesses use of online social media advertisements to obscure human trafficking practices. She also conducted research and provided logistical support for the human rights programs for Vital Voices Global Partnership. Megan graduated summa cum laude from the University of South Carolina, Go Gamecocks, Honors College with majors in global studies and Spanish, and a minor in Islamic world studies. While in college, Megan spent time in Cusco, Peru, studying Spanish and working in Apavida, a local human rights organization. She also spent a semester in Meknes, Morocco, where she studied Arabic and assisted a local community shelter in implementing English programs for youth and wellness programs for female survivors of violence. Megan was named the University of South Carolina's 2019 Outstanding Woman of the Year for her work leading campus and human trafficking efforts and promoting women's rights in her community. And we're connected now with the opportunity to have the interfaith strategy as part of the Human Task Force. She has been a great encouragement and a guide to make sure we're doing this to the best, again, to just help that one victim or prevent that one crime. And last but not least, our awesome Tenelle Jones. Tenelle Jones is licensed as marriage and family therapist and is licensed as an addictions counselor. She currently works full-time at MUSC's National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center as human service coordinator. It is also where she spent 3 years as one of the dedicated therapists who shared an experience of faith, hope, strength, and healing of the survivors and the impacted communities of the Mother Emanuel AME church shooting tragedy that occurred on June 17th, 2015. Now she provides trauma-informed care and specialized trauma treatments to the individuals who experience a crime, and she acts as a health educator in the Empower program, teaching, empowering, and leading young teens to make healthy and responsible decisions about sex, relationships, life, and their future. She also provides private counseling therapy for individuals, couples, and families through Low Country Pastoral Counseling Center. She is a professional development consultant in areas of self-care, creating work-life harmony, vicarious trauma, and organizational wellness through her LLC, and she serves as board chair on the board of directors of PAR, People Against Rape. For the past 23 years, her professional and personal life have been centered around promoting overall mental, physical, and spiritual health of all communities. She remains enthusiastic about showing others that they matter and have a place in this world through counseling, consultation, mentorship, training, education, and friendship. She believes as long as she lets her light shine and remain true to herself, it will give others the courage to do the same. And again, as you'll experience today, she has done that for our team, for our faith team, from the very beginning of our work, getting to come over there to Charleston. She has taught us a lot, and I can't wait for what she's going to teach you all today. So with that, I will then tag to do two things. We need you guys to do something. We've got 2 poll questions, don't we, Rachel? And do I get to do that? I'm trying to remember this. Yes. Oh, no, that's not the one. So do you have the one to launch? Because I don't have that one in front of me. It's only showing Tim's right now.
I've loaded them all, and I'm not a host right now, so I can't access.
Why don't you pull me out, and because we don't need to see the thing, so I'll stop sharing, okay. And we'll be good. We can create.
Okay.
There we go.
So, thank you all for your patience. Let me pull this back up.
Hey, COVID's teaching us a lot, everybody, and we're just glad to reach all of y'all like this and reach you safely too.
So you want me to pull question 1, Roger?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Because we want to get to know y'all. So please designate which one describes you. Multiple answers may be available. So go ahead and just fill that, click one or multiple ones and watch the magic. All right, that should be good. Let's see what we got.
So there we go. Can everyone see that?
Excellent, excellent. So we got awesome social workers, yay, social workers, senior adults, yay, and caregivers. I love you. I hope you're getting good self-care too, because that's important. And our faith community, thank you for being a part of this. And I'm praying that those that are here today and Crime Victim Services, multiply what you learned. And by the way, this is getting recorded, so we can definitely, after it gets all cleaned up and made ready for y'all, we can share this to all that didn't get to be a part. So thank you. Now we have one more poll question. Let's do poll question number 2. Kind of want to know where you are in this state and maybe out of this world. Let's see. Find out where you guys are. It says, please choose where you live. You can do it. This one should take like 5-10 seconds. And all right, we're covering a bunch. We didn't get anyone out of state this time. One time I did one of these talks and we had someone in Canada. So that was pretty cool. But we've got Midlands mainly, and thank you for showing a representation for the whole state. Again, thank you for your time. We know it's precious. As I was talking with Tim earlier this morning, we're praying that everyone gets to stay with us through this. We know that every one of you is in high demand, and we're again thankful for the time. So with no more further ado, Tim, I tag out and let you take care of us in the next period.
Right. Are we good to go?
You're good. Go ahead and share your screen there.
Good morning, everybody. Can you see what I put on the screen?
Not yet. Did you click on the PowerPoint? It should come through after you hit share. The fun of new technology.
Is it there now, Roger?
I'm not seeing it. Are y'all seeing it? Okay. Yeah, if you click share screen, it should show your PowerPoint, and then when you clicked on that, it should go live.
How's that?
There we go. Yes.
All right. Very good. I appreciate it.
And then make it presentation, and then we'll be set.
How's that?
You're awesome. It's all yours.
I'm not awesome. I'd probably sweat this more than talking to 1,000 people, I think, in my life. So thank you all for bearing with me. This is my first time Zooming when I'm talking at the same time. So I am probably going to do just that with my presentation. I'm going to talk fast because I have a lot that I kind of want to cram into this. And I want to talk to you mainly about avoiding exploitation among seniors and vulnerable adults. As most of you probably know, in the state of South Carolina, vulnerable adults, seniors also, are covered under a special dispensation of laws called an Omnibus Crime Act. And there is special coverage, special laws that pertain to those that might be vulnerable, who are 18 years of age and older, and also to those who may have some areas that they may need help with in life. I've got in front of you my email address, also my phone number. I would love to be of help to you if I can in any way. I'm at a season of life where that's where I spend most of my time, is trying to help and encourage individuals with areas directly related to vulnerable adults or to seniors. And I'm going to try to confine my conversation to ways the faith community can help and things that we can do to care for our seniors, especially as they grow in life and are working through many of the things from a crime situation that are facing us today that maybe we didn't face 20, 30 years ago. I'm going to do something with you that I figure if I can understand the subject, because I'm not the world's smartest guy, I figured that I would share to you the process that I take to understanding something a little bit better. And for that, I'll just call that a background. I'm sure many of you have studied this in school or have been made aware of this, but there are several things that I think impact our seniors today, our vulnerable adults. One of them is the greatest generation. These are individuals that we've heard a lot on TV about, programs written about. These are individuals who were born in the early 1900s to about 1920. These are individuals who lived through the Great Depression and they fought in World War II. They also tend to be the parents of the baby boomer generation. There are some traits that distinguish this great generation, which I both love to talk about and respect. One of them I've noticed is they have great personal responsibility. There's an honor, something that's entrusted to them. They're grateful for most everything, and they know what it means to cherish and respect other individuals. They have a lot of integrity. They value what is honest and true and noble and trustworthy and kind. In fact, over the years, I've kind of come to enjoy conversations with most of them because you can have an honest conversation with them. They practice what I would call humility. They know what it means to self-sacrifice. They know what it means to do the best for their family, for their community, for their country. They also have a work ethic, which I enjoy watching in play. They had to work to survive. They weren't afraid of work. To many of them, work literally meant life or death, and so they embraced work. They also practiced financial prudence. In the 30s and 40s, and I watched this with my own parents, everything was saved, right down to the heels off shoes, to the soles in shoes. Things could be used again. Another background to what we're about to talk about is the silent generation. These are folks that were born between 1925 and 1945. These individuals, others have named the silent generation because they were silenced under the burden of war and economic group or downturn. There are about 20 million of them in America today. These individuals worked very hard. They kept quiet. They believed, and I was told this, that children should be seen and not heard. Have you ever heard that before? They were cautious about where they went and with who they were seen. They grew up in conditions complicated by war and economic downturn. Many of them were children in crisis. And then starting in 1929, for about 10 years, America suffered the Great Depression, which made a profound impact on some of our elders today. A lot of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, their possessions. A quarter of Americans were unemployed. As if that wasn't enough, in the 1930s, for almost 10 years, the Dust Bowl struck. Farmlands were destroyed. They were out of money. They were out of food. The land yielded nothing for them. People who were caught in these areas developed serious lung problems. Then, of course, some of us remember the Korean War taking place when we were younger. This generation lived through that. It kind of moves it to today's generation, which is one of the reasons that I took the position with the Sheriff's Department and dedicated my job to working with especially baby boomers. It's because I am one. These are individuals who are between the age of 53 and 71 years old. Nearly 7 baby boomers are turning 65 each minute of the day. Right now in America, there are about 77 million baby boomers alone. They join the greatest and the silent generation in making up our elder population. And here's what I'm starting to move toward. They tell us their net worth is approximately $17.2 trillion. Now, I have a little tiny piece of that myself, but in my opinion, that's a lot of money. Willie Sutton was a bank robber in the 30s, 40s, and someone asked him once why he robbed banks, and his reply I thought was profound. He said, because that's where the money is. And I would say to you from a law enforcement standpoint, there's a new target in America of crime, and that's our elder population. I'm going to talk to you mainly about financial exploitation, hopefully give you some things to look for or things that our elders deal with. You can sum up financial exploitation as illegal or improper use of another person's resources for personal profit or gain. Why do they target our elder folks? I see this almost every day at work. I would say to you that one of the big reasons is because they were born in a different era of America. They're very trusting. They are the individuals that, when I was growing up, sat on the front porch in the evening, and the neighborhood all talked. We miss that today. They're very trusting, and they also are home every day, and they answer the phone. That may not seem like much to you, but it's important to understand that when you talk about financial exploitation of our elders. They have disposable income. They tend to believe what people tell them. They also, and this is important, tend to be polite to others, and they don't hang up the phone. I have a tendency to feel rude or not very nice if I hang up on somebody that wants to sell me new car insurance or extend the warranty on my car, and you all know what I'm talking about with those phone calls. I still have a little tinge of that upbringing that says you don't hang up the phone on people. I've actually gotten pretty good about it. They also are living longer, and they are some of the wealthiest people that have ever lived in our world. This is not my own phrase, but it's one I wrote down. I don't know where it came from. But as you work with our elder population, remember this. You can have financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult without physical abuse. But usually where you have physical abuse, you will also have financial exploitation. Just kind of tuck that away. I would say to you that in looking back over the years and the cases, that most exploitation of elder adults is performed by family members. That's kind of sad. They take their prescriptions. They sell their prescriptions. They take their life savings. They take their Social Security and retirement checks, sometimes even before they get to the house. They take their belongings and sell them, sometimes all at once, sometimes gradually over a period of time. They charge excessive rent for staying in a bedroom with a bed in it. They charge their family members for food, for room and board, for transportation. I could go on. But this is what financial exploitation usually looks like. It's the signing of checks or documents without the elder's consent or knowledge. Almost on a weekly basis, I see cases that involve checks being stolen out of mailboxes, and then they're called, then they're washed, is what we call it, where they wash the information off the check and they put new information on it. They charge them excessive fees for caregiver services. Some of the kind that make me the most upset are the flat out taking of an elder's property. Just take it. I was in a home several years ago where the woman had buried her husband that morning, and by that afternoon, family members were flat out taking property from the elder's garage. It's obtaining money or property by undue influence, misrepresentation, or fraud. Using their position as a child or as a grandchild or family member to bring influence upon them. They gain the victim's trust and the victim's confidence in them. Back in the day, they used to call fraud schemes confidence schemes because that's what they would do. They would gain the individual's confidence. Or just deliberately mismanaging the elder's income or misusing their assets. One of them I think I see quite often is family members who just move in on their elder. It's not about whether they were invited. It's not about whether that person deserves to have them there or needs to have them there or can afford to have them there. They just move in on them. And eventually they're living rent-free, not paying anything for food because the elder is expected to do all of that. Gradual isolation of the elder from social contact with family and with friends and with church, senior centers. This one is concerning, and when I speak to church groups especially, or senior centers, this is one of the things I ask of them to be very careful that they look for. When an elder begins to slowly slide off from social contact, especially it may be after a family member or a quote friend has moved in to help them. And eventually they're isolated and they're put in a position where they can be extorted and where they can be used or abused. The control of the elder's mail. I knew when I typed that on my screen that there are some caregivers out there. I was one of them. I was my mother's caregiver. My wife, Angie, is her mother's caregiver at this point. You always have people that say, well, I need to see her mail. Yeah, that's right. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a control that is placed over the senior, their mail, their phone calls, their visitors, their outings. Then I see cases where they're manipulated by withholding food or medications. Here's one I see a lot, threatening with abandonment. We'll just leave you alone. There's going to be nobody to care for you. Here's one that makes my blood boil, and that's hurting the elder's pet. If you don't do this, if you don't take care of this, or I'm going to put you, quote, in a nursing home, is one that I've heard. And so consequently, those are some of the things that they face, especially, again, from family members. There are financial scams out there, and I could burn a lot of time describing these and giving examples of these in great detail. There's one I would call the grandchild scam. This is where they get a phone call from a purported grandchild who is in jail. Many times they say they're in jail overseas. They've had a terrible accident, or they've been put in jail for DUI, or they're on a missions trip from the church. All this information is gleaned ahead of time before the phone call is made to the senior. And they say, I'm in jail, Grandpa, I'm on a mission trip. I need X amount of money, $3,000, just to talk to an attorney. Can you send it? There's a sweepstakes scam. There's many forms of this, where the elder is informed that they've won a car, that it's sitting on the ship in Miami, and to get the car off the ship, you have to pay an $800 fee, and then they pay that, and then they have to pay more money to get it registered, and all of a sudden they're into it for several $1,000s. There's no car. There's nothing they've won. There's no condo that is going to become theirs. There's no property that's going to become theirs. But I watch it by the thousands of dollars that are taken advantage of with these scams. One that we see a lot is online dating and sweetheart scams. This is when they meet someone online, because many of our seniors are actually very good online and on the web. And they meet someone online. There are people that are preying on them online. They live far away. They want to come visit. So they begin to ask for money to make the trip, or my daughter has needs. Can you help me? It's just another confidence scam. There's a friend in need scam, where they pose as actually one of the elder's friends. The elder doesn't follow up with that person in a different way, but they take it for what it is. Remember, they're trusting. And they give money, send money to individuals because of a friend in need. Courts and utilities and medical offices don't ask for gift cards as payments. But many times the scams that we deal with from a financial aspect are asking that the senior go to a local retail store and purchase certain gift cards, and then call from the car and give them the number of the card so they can take the money off it immediately. There's many of those taking place in America today. I'd like to finish up. I've tried to think about how we could make this applicable to social workers, to those in ministry, in churches, or in synagogues, senior centers, etc. And I'm kind of asking the question, what should I do? What should we tell people to do? And I may or may not help with this, but I'm going to try, and then you'll be done with me. But one of the things, and this doesn't sound very profound, but sometimes it's the profound things that are the unprofound things that are the most important. I'd say, number one, deliberately identify the elder and vulnerable adults in your church, community, class, neighborhood, senior group, whatever it is. One of the things that troubles me is I look at different societies and different people groups in our world. America seems to have lost a good bit of their respect for their senior population. I'm sure there are probably a lot of reasons we could give for that. I have some thoughts about that myself. But I know I have a tendency that I tell deputies when we're in training that seniors become invisible after a certain age, don't they? We tend not to see them. We tend not to take what they're saying serious. Don't do that, is my thought. Whether it's a deputy in a district or a region, or whether you are a social worker in a community, or whether you teach a class full of elders, deliberately identify your elders and your vulnerable adults right where you're at. Do you know who they are? in your neighborhood, in your group of friends, you know who they are. Think about that. Number two, look in on your neighbors and your friends, your group members, your class members, your loved ones. Be your brother and sister's keeper. Spend time with them. That is probably one of the hardest things you will ever do. In my mother's closing years, she came to live with us, and then she had to stay in one of our facilities for a year or so. And I found it very hard, to be honest with you, to break away from my busy life and spend time with her. It was just hard. I felt it was important. I felt it was something that I needed to do. It's something that I owed to her. But look in on them, even if it's the hard thing. I would say to you, if you're in leadership with our seniors in your community, designate a couple, a deacon. This is not something that maybe you can trust everyone to do well, but I'm going to bet you know some individuals, maybe a Meals on Wheels driver. Maybe you can set up some sort of accountability system. I know the church where Angie and I attend, there are deacons assigned to different of our seniors that actually they do a really good job of checking in on them and making sure they're doing okay. In fact, it was the Apostle James that says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God and the Father is to visit orphans and widows in their distress. I think whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament of the Scriptures, you want to get on God's bad side is you abuse orphans and you abuse widows. God has a special place in his heart for them, and I think we need to too. When you're visiting with these individuals, is this person always waiting for their mail? Whenever I say that phrase, I think of an individual that I know who's wealthy, neat family, neat house in a neat area. And my phone lit up several years ago because individuals were noticing him waiting sometimes for a long time at the mailbox in his neighborhood. And then his wife started to understand what was happening because money was missing and checks were being written because this individual was being taken advantage of by sweepstakes scams. He would literally wait for the mail to come every day, then react to whatever that scam was. And they actually took him for a lot of money. So is this person always waiting for the mail? Look at their mail. Look at the type of mail they're receiving. It may tell you a clue of what's happening in their lives. Are bills not being paid? Wonder why that is. They actually sat in a home of elders who have been taken advantage of, and the phone begins to ring and doesn't stop ringing. I've actually talked to these individuals on the phone who are calling to speak to this elder. They know them intimately. The elder knows them. The elder has their phone number to call them. I've had them send cabs to pick up the elder to take them to the bank or to cash a check. Are there visitors to their home? In your neighborhood, are you seeing cars cycling through where they live? People you've never seen before. They're not family members, but they're maybe not people either that know this elder. Ask yourself, has this elder become isolated? You just don't see him anymore, but you see people there. One of the things I would also say to individuals, And probably not a week goes by that I don't have several conversations with people who are my age, in their 60s, some younger in their 50s, maybe some older, who are just having a hard time having a hard conversation with their loved one, to talk to them about financial things, to talk with them about end-of-life things. For some reason, they just need some encouragement and some help, maybe somebody to stand with them to deal with something that is becoming harder. Because most of the time, I found that these kind of situations with our elders are not going to heal themselves, and they're not going to get better if you ignore them. It's a time to have a hard conversation with your loved one. Number 3, I'd say to you, is remind them there's no such thing as a free lunch. I remember my mother especially telling me that when I think that I could get something for nothing. I don't know how many times this was told to me, or that I grew up with it. Maybe you have too. But sometimes I've found in having conversations with elders who somebody's trying to take advantage of, or who are on the cusp of believing something that's being said to them, is just to remind them of this phrase. They know what it means. And I ask them just candidly and openly, how many times have you ever got something for nothing? I know how many times I have. I can't think of the last time. Jesus said in Luke 12, watch out and guard yourself from all types of greed, because one's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. It may be something from your faith that you need to say to them. But just to remind them in so many words that very seldom does our society give you anything free. It's costing somebody something. A big one I say to individuals who have dealt with financial fraud or exploitation, simple one again, hang up the phone. Don't talk on the phone to people you don't know. Consider using a cell phone alone. Now, I know most of our elders, when I talk to senior groups and retirement centers, this one always gets a reaction, because they're not going to give up that home phone. Because how would the family or others get a hold of me? I get all that. I think the biggest thing is to ensure that they understand, don't talk on the phone to people you don't know, and don't trust caller ID. Now, I'm also giving you the clue as to how paranoid you can get after a while. And I'm not saying be paranoid and make them paranoid, but help them to understand that if they don't know this person, don't talk on the phone to them, because you're not going to outwit them. They're going to call back, or they're going to sell your name and your phone number for $25 to another scammer who's going to try their thing with them. Number 5, don't give out personal information. Just don't. Whether it's over the phone or online, don't give it out to anyone unless you're the one that initiated the call. And these people are very good at what they do. Help that senior to understand that your bank's not going to ask for it on the phone. The IRS is not going to pick up the phone one day and say, I think I'll call this senior and ask him what their Social Security number is. It's not going to happen. The Social Security Administration won't ask for it. The police department locally is not going to call you up and ask for it. Don't give out personal information. Number 6 is a simple one, but I see people trip over this all the time. Scammers want you to make decisions immediately. Scammers thrive on confusion. They thrive on deception, smoke and mirrors. If they can make a situation move fast in the life of your loved one or your neighbor or a senior in your community, they're going to move it to their advantage. I counsel seniors to just slow down. Just slow down. If you are are being called upon to make a decision financially about something, a lot of times reputable people and organizations, first of all, are not going to do that to a senior. And they're not going to do it on the phone. And they certainly understand if that senior wants to take some time and talk to a family member or a friend. But they want you to make a quick decision. And I found sometimes it helps when family members sit down. I've sat down with family members and their senior adult who's being taken advantage of and just talk to them about the importance. Promise me you're not going to make a decision about this until you give me a call. We'll make it together. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I would say also that one of the things we need to counsel our seniors is put your house in order. You'd be surprised the number of seniors I talk to, you probably won't because you work with seniors, that don't have their house in order. There's no will, there's no power of attorney, there's no healthcare designate, there's no trust in place, there's no estate planning. It's very hard in life to come to that season where you have to acknowledge that life isn't always going to be for you. So talk to them about putting their house in order. Who do they want to do this or to take care of that? I found a lot of times that can ease some of the things that seniors face if they have someone they know and trust who will speak with them or speak for them, actually. I've got about 2 minutes left. I just wanted to give you a word about a welfare check. I think most people don't fully understand this or are aware of this, and heaven forbid, I'm not trying to put more of a load on our law enforcement agencies. But a welfare check is performed by people who are in law enforcement. Let me give you just an example. You're concerned about a neighbor. You haven't seen her for 4 weeks. The car's in the yard. You see the dog in the backyard. You see lights that may go on and off, but you sure haven't seen them. Or worse, newspapers are piling up, mail's not being picked up. Pick up your phone if you don't know their family members or loved ones, or if they're not coming to the door, if you go to it, call 911 and ask for a welfare check. Give the address. This is basically a service that is performed by law enforcement where a deputy or a police officer goes out, knocks on the door, attempts to make contact. Obviously, if contact isn't made, they just don't walk away. We're obligated to carry it to the next level or the next step to be sure that that person is okay. I'm asking you, that's not something you abuse. That's not something you send law enforcement to your house to make sure that, you know, your mom's getting her mail. That's not what I'm saying. But understand that that's kind of a tool that's out there. If something doesn't appear right to you and you can articulate what it is you're seeing or not seeing, remember a welfare check on that individual may be something where a deputy can go by and chat with that person, step into the house with them. You know, is the AC running? Is the heat running? I see kind of an uptick in these when it gets very hot and when it gets very cold because people worry about their loved ones or their community members. Is their heat pump working? And, you know, it's 28 degrees outside. Do they have water, etc.? One of my favorite portions of the Old Testament is from the prophet Isaiah. He said, I will be the same until your old age. I'll bear you up when you turn gray. I have made you, and I will carry you and bear you and rescue you. You can tell I've got white hair from my Irish mother. She had jet white hair that kind of had a bluish tinge to it. But that's kind of been a comfort to me in this season of my life as I move toward becoming older. That God has a special place in his heart for our older folks. You've got my email address up there. You've got my office phone number. I always return my phone calls, and I would love to help you in any way that I can. I want to thank you again, Roger, and others for making this happen. And I appreciate it very much. I hope I was on time.
You did great, Tim. Thank you so much. We're going to allow now for just a question and answer time. If there's any questions, each one of the speakers is going to give very distinctive and yet complimentary help information, but we don't want to make you wait till the very end. Are there any questions, Kay or Rachel? You see?
Hi, Roger. This is Kay. Why don't we take the questions at the end, or put the questions in the chat, and maybe Tim could answer the questions in the chat, because we want to be sure to give plenty of time for the other presenters.
Sounds great. I appreciate that wisdom.
So if we could just, and at the end, we'll take questions for everybody. But, okay. You know, with Tenelle and Megan, I want to be sure that we have plenty of time for their presentations.
Very good. And I'll just heads up, Tim, go ahead and take a look. There's one question in there from Sherilyn. And so you can get ready for that, and we'll do that at the end then. Thank you. All right, Megan. And Tim, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. I'm not sure if I'm able to share. Let's see. Tim, I think I'm going to need host power. If you could switch that.
Megan and more and make host.
Awesome. Got it.
All right, Megan. You good?
Yes. Can you all see my screen?
I got you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that information, Tim. That was incredibly informative, and actually really complements some of the content I'm about to share as well, so thank you. Like Roger said earlier, my name is Megan. I work at the South Carolina Office of the Attorney General on the human trafficking programs. And so before I get started, I just wanted to see if you all wanted to put in the chat your experience with human trafficking, if this is a new term for you, or if you've heard about it. Just sort of where everyone's at, so we can get a sense for that. I know human trafficking has been receiving a lot of media attention lately, and so I'm sure some folks have heard about it, which looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and define it really quick so we're all on the same page. Human trafficking is when an individual under force, fraud, or coercion is made to perform commercial sex acts or labor services, or when the person induced to perform these acts is under the age of 18. So I really want to highlight that last part there. Essentially, that means that any minor, anyone under the age of 18 who is performing a commercial sex act, we don't need to prove force, fraud, or coercion for them to fall under the legal definition of human trafficking. They are automatically a victim. So phrases like child prostitute would be legally inaccurate because a child cannot consent to that sort of behavior. For labor trafficking, minors do have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So that exception is only for sex trafficking of minors. Human trafficking is prohibited under both US and South Carolina laws. The US federal law came in 2000, and so this year we're actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And the South Carolina law was released in 2012, which is the same year that created the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force, which is where I work with my supervisor, Catherine Moorhead. So I want to dig into this concept of force, fraud, or coercion a little bit more because this is essentially what distinguishes human trafficking from any other form of exploitation. Force is the more self-explanatory one. This is really any physical abuse that is done in order to victimize somebody. This can be anything from kidnapping to rape, confinement and starvation, any sort of assault. There's that force component. Fraud is, we typically see false or deceptive job offers that traffickers put out to try and get victims to work for them, lying about working conditions or wages. Oftentimes traffickers will promise a better life or a better marriage, and these things are often used, they're veiled lies to try and get victims to work for them, to be with them, and to sort of surrender their freedom. And the last one is coercion. This has always been the more difficult one for me to understand, but the best way I can explain it is that it's a threat of harm, whether that's a threat of actual physical abuse, whether that's a threat of abuse to the legal process, like a threat of deportation. or any plan intended to cause a person to believe that if they don't do something, if they don't do what the trafficker asks, then they are going to be harmed. And like I said, these components, the force, fraud, or coercion, are not necessary to prove for minor victims of sex trafficking, but for all forms of labor trafficking and for adults with sex trafficking, we must prove one of these three components. The other key thing to understand about human trafficking is that at its root, it is a crime that exchanges a human being for anything of value. Typically, we think of money, somebody being sold into sex for money, or somebody being forced to work for money. But this is a super broad definition, actually. We've seen victims sold for drugs, for alcohol, for food or shelter or clothing. The one on the picture on the bottom left is a gang, and we had a case where a victim was sex trafficked so the trafficker could gain a sense of social status in his gang. So it wasn't even something physical. It was a concept that was still something of value, that social status had value to that gang member. And so that really illustrates how widespread this crime can be, because it's not just money, it can be really anything of value. When we talk about prevalence, human trafficking is a really difficult crime to pin down in numbers. Inherently, it's an underground crime. And so when we think about estimates, we have to look at the statistics with a critical eye. This number from the International Labor Organization estimates there are 40.3 million victims of human trafficking worldwide. Some of these definitions include child marriage. Those that don't have lower numbers. But for sure, we know that human trafficking on a global scale has millions of victims. When we look at the US, the State Department has put out this number. They think that about between 14,500 and 17,500 human beings are trafficked into the US. But that is not the full story. Most trafficking victims are actually already here. And so the narrative that trafficking is being brought into our country is not really the full story. A lot of victims are trafficked right in their homes. They don't even cross borders anywhere. And this map comes from the National Human Trafficking Hotline run by Polaris. It's a heat map that shows where the highest volumes of calls to the national hotline are. As you can see, the places where there's red dots means that there's the most calls coming in. We see all along the East Coast here is pretty blanketed with calls. South Carolina in particular has a higher risk because we are between Atlanta and Charlotte, and those are two major cities for human trafficking. And we have that I-95 corridor where traffickers can transport their victims quite easily. So South Carolina for sure is a place where trafficking is happening. The top 5 states in the nation, we would say, would probably be California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Illinois in no particular order. Some of that is due just to the higher volume of people and the major cities that are there. But human trafficking has been recorded in every state in the US. When we zero in on South Carolina, the state task force released our annual report a little later at this time last year, in January. And these were the top 5 counties for human trafficking in South Carolina, Richland being number 1, followed by Horry, Greenville, Charleston, and Beaufort. And these are basically the places that were getting the most reports. I want to take a moment to differentiate between human trafficking and human smuggling. Oftentimes I see folks confuse this, understandably so. Trafficking sort of insinuates that there's movement involved, but actually there doesn't have to be. Human trafficking is a crime against an individual. There doesn't have to be any border crossing. There can be border crossing, but the nature of the crime is not dependent on that. Often with human trafficking, there are documents taken, there's coercion, that force, fraud, or coercion, and the commodity being exchanged is an individual. In contrast, with human smuggling, the nature of the crime is a crime against the state. It is a border crossing. It's an illegal one. And oftentimes, though, this is voluntary. Somebody asks to be smuggled. So the commodity here is a service or a movement of people. It's a different thing from human trafficking. The one thing that underlies both of them is that they are both profitable businesses involving human beings, and they also involve criminal networks. So whenever you see articles about human trafficking, make sure they're defining it correctly. I've seen sometimes articles getting confused with the two, so it's an important thing to keep in mind when studying this crime. Historically, we've talked about human trafficking in 2 forms, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But in 2017, the National Human Trafficking Hotline released a report that essentially said there are 25 different types of sex trafficking and labor trafficking, that there are subtypes. And essentially what this did is define where sex and labor trafficking take place, and it gave us a much clearer picture of what this crime actually looks like. So for sex trafficking, the types that have been identified by the hotline include personal sexual servitude, remote interactive sexual acts, illicit massage businesses, escort services, residential brothels, outdoor solicitation, pornography, bars, strip clubs, and cantinas. So these are all the locations that have been recorded as having human trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, occur. With labor trafficking, I won't read all of these because there's way more, but if you look at this and you scan through, you can see that human trafficking is happening in almost every industry. There's no industry really that's not included here. And it speaks to the importance of us as community members, as faith leaders, as leaders in our field, to be able to identify victims and spot the signs of trafficking, because it can really happen anywhere. This is one of my most important slides. I always tell people, feel free to take a picture, because this is the really important information. These are the potential indicators of human trafficking. And for community members or folks that are wanting to be involved in this work, knowing these signs is a really easy and important thing that you can do to get involved. There's only one sign of human trafficking that you can for sure know trafficking is happening, and that's when there's a minor engaging in commercial sex work. We know, like I said earlier, that they're automatically a victim. The rest of the signs kind of require some more deduction. You need to be seeing the fullness of a person's situation to really understand if someone's a victim. And so I'm going to go through them really quickly. Potential victims of human trafficking may display fearful, anxious, or submissive behavior. They may show signs of poor hygiene, malnourishment, or fatigue, or physical or sexual abuse. Trafficking victims frequently lack movement or are heavily monitored. This is a really important part of trafficking victimization. Oftentimes, traffickers heavily restrict their ability to make their own decisions and go places where they like. And so it's really important to note if someone's not able to move freely, that something may be wrong. Victims often lack control over their money, identification, or phone. We frequently see traffickers taking immigration documents, taking somebody's ability to communicate with their support network. And this is an intentional strategy that traffickers use to sort of disable a victim's ability to reach out for help. Victims often have been recruited through false promises concerning the nature or conditions of the work. It's that fraud component we talked about. And trafficking victims may often owe a large amount of debt that they're unable to pay off. This is also a strategy used by traffickers called debt bondage, to trap their victims and force them to continue working because they have a debt that's being held over their head. This debt is frequently out of proportion to the work or to what has been done. And so it's really important that if you know somebody who's working off a debt like that, that may be a red flag. Victims may be dressed inappropriately for the climate or for his or her age, and they may be paid or unpaid or paid very little for the work. That last part is, I want to make a note on that. If that is the only thing that is happening, if there's not fair wage or there's wage theft, we need to know and make sure that there are other signs, because that may be simply labor exploitation. But if that is happening in conjunction with forced fraud or coercion, then that would elevate the crime to the level of labor trafficking. This is a really important part. I mentioned earlier that human trafficking can happen anywhere and to anyone, and this is true. There is no single profile of a trafficking victim, but I do want to note that there are particularly vulnerable populations who have some unmet basic needs that traffickers may exploit. That is what traffickers at its root are looking for. They're looking for unmet basic needs that they can step into a victim's life and provide that need, but then also use that person for their own ends and for abuse. So one of the most vulnerable populations that we have identified for human trafficking is runaway and homeless youth. Obviously, they have a whole plethora of unmet basic needs, from food, water, and shelter to a sense of care and love. And traffickers see those vulnerabilities and they exploit them. And so runaway homeless youth are really vulnerable. Foreign nationals experience other vulnerabilities. Frequently, they may not speak the language, they may have language barriers, what traffickers may exploit. They may not know the US legal system or their legal rights, which traffickers also take advantage of. Individuals with disabilities, we've seen a greater amount of these folks being victimized. And in many cases, it's because they don't have somebody looking out for them very closely, or because they have, again, unmet basic needs, whether that's emotional or physical. Individuals with a history of trauma, abuse, or neglect are at risk, simply because they may never have experienced a healthy relationship. And traffickers often, go through a grooming process. They befriend a victim. They get to know them for months at a time before they abuse them. And for individuals with this history of trauma, they may not recognize signs as that grooming process is progressing, and so they are vulnerable to this crime. LGBTQIA+ individuals may be vulnerable. Some of these folks may not feel a sense of acceptance, and traffickers may offer it. Low-income individuals, these are, again, folks living in poverty who may have those unmet basic needs. Traffickers often meet them where they are. And then individuals facing social isolation. Like I mentioned earlier, restricting a victim's movement is a primary tactic that traffickers use. And when someone is already in isolation, that work is already done for the trafficker. They are disconnected from a support network that may help them. And so those folks are at risk. Now, I highlighted the individuals with disabilities and individuals facing social isolation for a reason. Oftentimes our senior folks are experiencing this. And in 2019, actually, the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons identified seniors as an underserved human trafficking victim population. This was huge. This is not really a topic that we talk a lot about. If you've seen human trafficking in the news recently, I'm sure you've seen a focus on child sex trafficking. So there's a lot of emphasis in the public discourse about children and youth, rightly so, but sometimes that comes at the expense of talking about older adults and aging adults in this conversation. Significant gaps were identified in the availability of long-term housing and extended support services for elderly victims. I know in our state already, South Carolina faces a lack of residential housing options for trafficking victims, and the ones that we do have typically are focused on either minors or young adults. We do have one house open for adults, but it's not enough to serve the number of victims that we're seeing, and so that is a gap that we're really trying to remedy. Gaps were also identified in data collection regarding elderly victim populations. I mentioned earlier that data collection and measuring the prevalence of human trafficking is always an issue, not just in South Carolina, but across the United States and also abroad, given the nature of the crime. But we definitely need more data on this topic because right now it's really not being discussed as much since we're not studying it frequently. I want to highlight the vulnerabilities that aging adults face to human trafficking. The vulnerabilities I discussed before, we're sort of looking at the US population as a whole, but for sure, senior adults face a number of vulnerabilities that are more specific to human trafficking. That social isolation component I mentioned earlier is really important. Often senior adults are living alone, or they don't have as deep connection to a support network. This is especially true in the COVID-19 pandemic. And traffickers may exploit that. They may start befriending that person or feeding them information, and when no one else is around to say, hey, that doesn't sound right, or hey, let's check that source, senior adults may not know that they're at risk. Mental impairment is a vulnerability, and recent studies are showing that nearly half of senior adults with dementia experience abuse or neglect. So this is a huge gap, a huge vulnerability for these folks when it comes to human trafficking. Lack of caregiver support can leave senior adults more at risk for traffickers. And that kind of goes along with that social isolation component. If they don't have somebody there to talk with or to discuss what's going on, traffickers may take advantage of that. Reduced control over finances. Tim discussed at length a lot of the risks that senior adults face to financial abuse and theft. And when they're maybe ceding that control to somebody else, whether that be a family member or an outside individual, they may not know what's going on, and maybe traffickers are able to sort of take advantage of that. And of course, any senior adult facing neglect, like I mentioned earlier, traffickers seek to meet unmet basic needs so that they befriend a person to abuse them. And neglect is, of course, a really profound unmet need. If somebody's not getting the care and love that they need, traffickers often spot that and exploit it. So these are all vulnerabilities that leave senior adults potentially at risk for trafficking. And it's definitely something to be aware of if you're a caregiver or if you are a family member of somebody who is aging. When we talk about traffickers, I've been mentioning them a lot. Just like victims, there's no single profile, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds, and they can either be individual criminals or sometimes they operate in more organized, widespread crime networks. But no matter where they come from, no matter their modus of operation, they are exploiting people for their own profit. Some examples of traffickers I've included here, I mentioned gang members earlier. Not all gang members are traffickers, but we've seen human trafficking in gangs related. Small business owners or managers could engage in labor trafficking. And that last one is important. intimate partners or family members. In South Carolina, we have seen that we have familial human trafficking, which means that the trafficker is a family member of the victim. This is important just because it's important for us to note that, you know, just because people are related doesn't mean there's no abuse going on. It still means that we have to look at things with a critical eye and watch out for those signs of trafficking, because intimate partners and family members can also be perpetuating this sort of abuse. I want to take a moment to address a couple human trafficking myths that I've seen a lot lately in the news and that may be helpful in clarifying as we move forward to make sure that when we assess these potential situations, we know all of the facts. There's been a myth that I think has gotten debunked a little more recently, which is that human trafficking mainly happens in developing countries. You know, like I said earlier, human trafficking has been reported in every single state in the US and certainly in South Carolina. This is a problem that is here and that we all must address no matter where we live. All human trafficking involves commercial sex. Sex trafficking gets far more discussion and attention in the media and in circles that discuss this crime, but human trafficking also includes labor trafficking. And so it's important to note that it's not all sex trafficking, but labor can be exploited as well. I mentioned this earlier, this myth that human trafficking always includes travel or transportation across borders. Human trafficking doesn't require border crossing, and it's not the same as human smuggling, which requires that border crossing. There's a myth that victims are held against their will using a physical restraint or bondage. You may see media articles with somebody's wrists tied with ropes or their hand over the mouth, and this is just not indicative of all types of human trafficking. While some traffickers do use physical force, they also use psychological tactics to control their victims. And that's why it's really important when we're caring for senior adults to be aware of what's going on in their life, the kind of people they're talking to, because oftentimes there may be no physical abuse involved, but there may be fraud and there may be psychological manipulation. And so it's important to keep that in mind as well. Sometimes we think of only women and children experiencing trafficking, but the reality is that anybody can experience trafficking, including men and including boys. And so we shouldn't write anyone off just because of their gender. All people are at risk, no matter their gender. There's a myth that really is relevant here, which is that only young people experience human trafficking. Like I said, child sex trafficking has received a lot of media coverage recently, and it's a really important issue, but it isn't the only type of human trafficking there is. Anybody can experience this crime, including senior adults, and so it's important that we have that frame of mind when we're working with seniors and aging adults. This is another important myth I want to debunk, which is that traffickers target victims they don't know. This is sort of the narrative that somebody's going to be snatched off the street or kidnapped. I've seen some rumors in South Carolina about white vans that have markings on them and that means it's a trafficker, and that is not true. There are rare instances in which kidnapping is involved, but the vast majority of human trafficking cases, victims know their abuser, they know their trafficker. Some survivors, many survivors, have even been trafficked by their own family members and intimate partners. So it's not something, this kind of nebulous concept that someone could be snatched. Usually traffickers are intentional in building relationships with their victims, and so it's important to keep that in mind when we're assessing if there's any sort of abuse going on. And the last one, that victims are desperate to escape their situation and ask for help. The reality of this crime is that many victims don't self-identify, and they don't know that they're being abused, or they don't think that they are. They may not readily seek help for a number of reasons that include shame or fear or trauma bonds with the trafficker. If a trafficker has gone through that grooming process and has really given love and care to that victim, even though they're being abused, that victim may associate their trafficker with, the sense of care or feeling like they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And so just because somebody has that trauma bond doesn't mean that there's no abuse going on, and we want to make sure that we're there to offer them services and assistance no matter what their situation is. I want to take a moment to sort of discuss what we're doing at the Attorney General's office to combat this problem, because there is opportunity for you as community members to be involved in this. Of course, I come from the state task force, and we have quarterly meetings. We're going to be holding our next one virtually, so you are all more than welcome to join. I'll have my email on the last slide, and you can email me, and I'll make sure to add you to our listserv so you get our newsletters and updates, and you can see ways that you can be involved, including participating in those virtual meetings. We also have regional task forces, which are really awesome and essentially work on combating human trafficking at a more local level. Here in Richland County, we have the Richland County Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. That's another group you can get involved with. You can go to their quarterly meetings and receive their updates and see if there's any ways that you or your church or your organization can participate in this work with us. A lot of the initiatives that we are working on come from the South Carolina State Plan to address human trafficking. And if you'd be interested in reading that, I welcome you to. It's on our website, which I'll have on the last slide as well. But we are working constantly to get awareness out there, to make sure that we are educating folks on this topic, whether that be through public awareness campaigns and posters or trainings like this. And we are continuing to update our legislation. As a state, we have really progressed since 2012, and we've got so much going on. And so I welcome you to visit our website. Some of the initiatives that I'm working on that may be of interest, we're working on making sure folks can identify victims better, and whether that be community members or whether that be law enforcement or folks in specific sectors, victims often present differently based on the setting that they're in. And so we're working on getting trainings out so that we can be identifying victims where they are. Of course, that service provision component, like I mentioned, we're really wanting to expand the care and service options that we have for victims who come out and survivors who are wanting to seek care. I mentioned those trainings. We're trying to get trainings out based on people's sector so that wherever they are equipped to identify potential victims. We're working on youth engagement and awareness efforts, both in the school level as well as college. Data collection is something we're always trying to expand so we have an accurate picture of what this crime is in our state. And then of course, public awareness campaigns and efforts to get the national hotline number out, get those signs of human trafficking out so that people can really know what they're looking for. How can you help? There are so many ways for everyone to get involved. Of course, the first is understanding how to report potential human trafficking situations. Knowing the signs of human trafficking, knowing the vulnerabilities I talked about is the first step. If you think that you see some human trafficking or you think someone near to you is being abused, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number, which I'll have on the next slide, or you can call your local law enforcement, depending on what you're most comfortable with. But those options are available to you should you feel there's abuse going on. Promote human trafficking awareness in your home and community. It is so important that we talk with our families and our friends about this, especially if our family is an aging or senior adult member, so that they know what could potentially happen, what's out there, how to protect themselves, and staying up to date with relevant news in this community. I welcome you to join our listserv. I welcome you to contact your regional task force. We would love to have you involved and keep you updated on everything that we're doing, because this is an issue that we really need everyone involved in to know and understand this crime. So that is all I have. Please, like I said, feel free to email me with any questions, or if you'd like to be added to our listserv, visit our website for more information. And I invite you to pull out your phones and put in the National Human Trafficking Hotline number for a time that you may need it. Thank you.
Hi, Megan. This is Kay. There's one question in the chat before we move on. It's from LaQuanda Washington of the Santee Lynch's region. What's the difference between kidnapping and human trafficking?
I love that question. Thank you so much. So the difference is that forced, fraud, or coercion component. Kidnapping is not the same thing as human trafficking. Human trafficking may involve kidnapping. For example, if a trafficker kidnaps their victim and then sells them for sex, there's that forced component, and then for the purpose of a commercial sex act. But kidnapping on its own without any forced, fraud, or coercion, or without any end goal, a commercial sex act or a labor service, without that end portion, it's just kidnapping. We want to make sure that we're looking and discerning between the crimes that are just sort of one-time deals or for other reasons. But if somebody's being sold and exchanged for anything of value, that money or the drugs or alcohol or the social status, all those things we talked about, that's anything of value, that has to be on the other side of the kidnapping for it to equal human trafficking. Are there any other questions? Okay.
There seemed to also be a question when it comes to sex trafficking. Can you speak especially about laws that are in place for traffickers? Most often we as social workers experience instances where the person being trafficked also is charged with crimes associated with them being exploited.
With them being what?
Exploited.
Exploited. So are they asking about the victims or the traffickers?
Seems to be they're asking about what laws are there in place for the traffickers. Okay,
yeah. So in 2018, the there was a bill passed that increased penalties for traffickers depending on the age of the victim and how long, a number of different qualities, essentially. And so the penalties have been increased, the time in jail has been increased. I invite you to look at that law. It's in our annual report from 2018 and 2019. We mentioned them both, and that's at our website. But there are laws in place to penalize traffickers, and it's something that we're working to do. We want to make sure that people are held accountable for these crimes and there's justice for the victims. And so that's something that we prioritize in our mission at the Attorney General's office.
One of the other questions I saw was, what's the oldest age you see, in human trafficking for elderly citizens? And is it more senior women or more senior men? And is it more disabled or mentally ill seniors that makes them vulnerable?
That's a great question. Well, all of those would be vulnerabilities. In terms of what we're seeing in South Carolina, I don't have the demographic data to answer that question specifically, but what I can say is that a lot of folks I work with, both at the Attorney General's office and service providers who've been dealing with this population for quite some time, have seen victims from age 1 to in their 70s. So this crime spans a whole group of people and really does not discriminate based on age. In terms of the gender disparities, in general, for sex trafficking, we do tend to see more women are sex trafficked than men. And in labor trafficking, depending on the sector, so for example, in agriculture, we tend to see more men being labor trafficked in that sector. But like I said, that doesn't mean that men aren't sex trafficked or that women aren't sex trafficked or labor trafficked in those fields. They do happen to anyone. And so unfortunately, I can't give a more specific answer, but I hope with our data collection initiatives, we can start to get some more specific demographic data like that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you.
And back to Roger.
I was just going to say again, we're obviously getting to have more information than the 2 hours is going to go, and I want to just let you all know, as my voice fades, that this meeting, for the sake of access to us, doesn't end when the meeting ends. Please, you're getting our contact information. Please follow up with each of us. I saw a question asking about, does Tim speak at HOAs in Lexington County? I'll let him answer that. But we're looking to make ourselves available beyond this, because as you can tell, there's a lot of elements regarding victimization of seniors and how to avoid the exploitation. So again, we're thankful for today, and we look forward to build out. But next we have Tenelle Jones. Please take us to the next level of your talk.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I do have a couple of poll questions that we will start with. So my talk today is about faith, hope, and healing, what happens now. I will incorporate a lot of what has already been presented. This is really more about how do you help someone who, understanding trauma, what happens in trauma when it comes to faith, and also how do you provide trauma-informed care, no matter what age of the person that you're working with. And then as the faith community, how does the faith community be involved in a person's healing? And so please go ahead, and if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to include them in the chat or question and answer feature. All right, so I do have 2 poll questions. And let me pull those up. All right, so how often does your place of worship address mental health? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay, so we have some never, rarely, sometimes, often, and no, always. Okay, so that's interesting. And the next question. Think of your own history of hardship, pain, trauma, and suffering. How would you rate your satisfaction with the resources available within your faith community to help you? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that question. Okay. So again, no one said completely satisfied. So hopefully you'll get some ideas if you're part of the faith community or if you're part of a church, a congregation, that you can take this information back and how to be helpful to individuals who have experienced trauma. One of the things that I think happens is that the community doesn't really understand what trauma is, and we say that word, and so now with a lot of things going on, you might hear it more often. So, but trauma involves a profound loss, and so when that happens, the person's world is never the same again, and it involves everything that they've learned about themselves throughout life. And so we have basic psychological needs such as safety, trust, control, intimacy, and esteem. And when a trauma occurs based off of what you learned about those particular concepts growing up, or those needs, how those needs were met, trauma can shatter those, or it can continue to make things more difficult for a person. And so ultimately, trauma can impact everybody's interpersonal, intrapsychic, familiar, spiritual, cultural, and social experiences and backgrounds. So what does that mean? A person who before any experience of trauma, they had an idea of who they were. And then when they have trauma, it can change how they see themselves again in relation to what happened, in relation to the other people around them, especially if the trauma occurred with somebody that they know. And the different types of trauma obviously can include just homicide. What's not often addressed is traumatic bereavement a lot as a specific trauma, like losing someone suddenly can be very traumatic, especially for even the elderly population. And so car accidents, just having things like, we have lots of weather happening, hurricanes, all of that can be traumatic for an individual. Obviously, shootings that have occurred. And so it shapes their identity, and then it changes how they view the world. But I would say one of the things in my work as a person who provides trauma treatment is the actual change in spirituality. And so a lot of times people, individuals who've been impacted by trauma will often question their relationship with God, or ask God, the question of why did this happen? And sometimes the faith community can be very helpful, but I've also witnessed where the faith community or the church they were going to was not very helpful, in that they kind of made me come off and say things that can cause further damage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, the 3 ways that a person who is suffering from trauma may be perpetuated. The individual themselves, again, they get into their mind, they start to blame themselves for things that happened that or may not have a realistic view of how they could have stopped something. Sometimes people feel like, oh, if I would have just done this differently. We see within sexual assault, oh, if I would have maybe not gone to a certain place, or, you know, just so many different things. And speaking generally about the Mother Emanuel tragedy, there were so many people that were, you know, wondering, oh, if I'd have just stayed home, or if I'd have done something different. And so that can perpetuate a person's suffering, and then they start to blame themselves. That gets into how they take care of themselves, and then how they see their self-worth. Organizations such as faith organizations, social service organizations in the community can perpetuate suffering. One, by, again, not acknowledging that trauma happens, and for other several different reasons, just kind of take on this know-it-all, and not necessarily, which I'll talk a little bit more as well, but just take on this persona of kind of blaming sometimes of people, or I don't like to use the word victims, but blaming people who've experienced certain things. Or again, with the faith community, having some church leaders might say, you know, you'll be okay. All you have to do is just pray. And, you know, or even telling people that they're not Christian enough, or maybe things happen because you weren't doing what you were supposed to do. And so that can cause suffering. And so if these conditions, trauma leads to other mental health conditions, again, some faith organizations have deterred members of their community from going to get counseling, again, because just saying you should just be able to rely on the church, and the church not necessarily having a lot of resources. Again, if a person needs medication, again, challenging that person with doing something just like praying, instead of going to seek the help that they need. And of course, society in itself perpetuates it by constantly exposing individuals to other things that could be impactful, just not being supportive. We see all the time in media how if things do happen, there's always this, again, kind of bringing it back to the individual. Well, what did they do wrong? What could have done differently? We see that now when we watch things on the news about social injustices. So just some things to be mindful of. So when people experience trauma reminders can happen throughout their life. And I think sometimes the faith community, or even just people in social services, or the helping professions, think that a person has trauma, they get help, and then they should be okay. Well, there's no definite end to healing. So the healing can change for people, but there will always be trauma reminders, especially as long as we have TV, social media, news, as long as people are breathing. Trauma reminders can be just being around certain people, going to certain places that are that may resemble a particular place that a person might experience the trauma. So again, if it's a sudden loss of a loved one, going to hospitals might be hard. I know for the Mother Emanuel population, some church members couldn't even go back to their place of worship because this tragedy happened there. And so just not being able to do the things that they used to do. Another important thing is just how certain smells, certain things that you hear, all of those can at some point be a trauma reminder for people, which will evoke certain emotions, thoughts, and internal sensations within that person, which can cause the way that they interact with you differently. And so if you don't know that, if you are in the faith community and you see that change and you don't notice that, then something that you might say may be off-putting, or something that you may or may not do may be off-putting, and the person may then start to reject you as their faith leader, and that might not be something that you really want to do or to happen. So it's important to have a trauma-informed care approach in everything that you do. So this is not just for faith organizations. This is for if you are a social worker, if you are a part of any type of organization, really knowing what trauma-informed care is about. And so you have to be able to, if you have a place of worship or you have an office building, making sure that place is safe, and offers that person a feeling of comfort that when they come to this environment is going to be safe. I know, again, kind of speaking about Mother Emanuel, the church, and they had to make a lot of different changes to make sure that the congregation and people coming to visit were going to be safe. They had to change the way that they had open doors and allow people to come in to, just freely walk around the church. They had to make those changes now. They couldn't just allow that to happen. So you have to schedule appointments and different things. And so it just changes the way a person might typically worship. But, doing that for the safety of their congregation. The trustworthiness and transparency is really about understanding the experience of trauma and how how your organization and services and buildings can, again, make a person feel comfortable and that you have their best interests at heart. So you're not doing anything behind their back. You're not only just there because you're trying to get recognition or acknowledgement for what you're doing. Peer support, really connecting people to in the community to people who've experienced similar things so that they can get the support. Sometimes if a person hasn't gone through any suffering or trauma, they may not be able to empathize, and so it might be helpful for other people to have peer support within their networks. Collaboration and mutuality, that is again about helping that person feel safe and that's receiving services, leveling the power differences. Okay, so if you are a person who is a social worker or you're a faith leader and a person who's coming to you, they've experienced trauma, you don't want to necessarily come at them as if you have more power over them or that you know everything about their situation. So really just kind of being level with that person, and let them know that you are in this with them as much as you possibly can and this is most important, without taking over their own trauma. And if you have any questions about that, I can explain that a little bit more, but it's essentially not imposing your emotions on them so that now they have to take care of you. And I see that a lot happens with just in general with clinicians, social workers, and even in the faith community where, yes, this thing happened, you are in pain, and so is the person that it happened to. But again, you put yourself where you're maybe emoting more than the person who actually experienced the actual event. And so that person doesn't feel comfortable because now they have to take care of you. And then the cultural, historical, and gender issues, whatever the trauma is, again, whether it's human trafficking or some of the things that Tim talked about, recognizing recognizing the cultural dynamics of that, the historical context of that, and any gender issues that are related to that, including sexual orientation, age, religion, gender decision-making. All of those are going to be important, especially if you are also going to offer access to any services. You want to make sure that you are aware of those different components as a part of faith, as a part of the hope, and as a part of the healing process. And so trauma-informed care really is about realizing that trauma is widespread and the path to recovery is not the same for everybody, and it's not this just kind of direct, straight route. It's going to there are going to be a lot of different complexities involved in recovery. And so being aware of that. And again, where you might have one, if you're in the faith community, you might say, well, this is the best way to heal. Again, if you're trying to prescribe a faith-based approach, recognizing that is still different from everybody. Like, everybody deserves their own individual guidance. And so then also recognizing that the impact that this trauma that a person has experienced on that person, their families, the people around you, and other people that are involved in the system. Because if you are able to help the other people as well, or provide some type of resources and support, then they can also be supportive to the individual who's experienced the trauma. And so that can also be part of, again, building hope, building that healing system. responding fully, integrate, like just, again, just kind of being knowledgeable about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. So as a person or organization, you must know how a person who's been impacted by a trauma or crime, how they have to go through different systems and what those systems are like. That way you can guide them in that process. So what is it like to go through, the legal system? What is it like to go through law enforcement? The person having to go possibly get medical treatment, mental health treatment. So being aware of these systems within your community so that you can also guide a person through that might experience something traumatic. And also you want to make sure that you're not actively trying to re-traumatize a person. And so that also can be very difficult because you have to understand what the person went through and recognize your behavior. Sometimes we don't know. Again, sometimes saying something like to a person who's lost a loved one or could, like, they're in a better place, really can be traumatizing. I think I've heard that a lot where people will say that, like, oh, they're in a better place, or you have another child, or it was meant to be. Sometimes with the faith community, I've heard them say, God doesn't make any mistakes. That can be very hurtful to a person, and they might not feel comfortable sharing that. And so what I've seen happen is that person drifts away from the church because they don't feel supported. And so just being mindful of how you say things to people and what actually is helpful and what's not helpful. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what churches and faith leaders can do to help build faith and hope and healing. And one of the most important things that I do doing counseling is help people identify values. And so there are certain values that I think if you hold to, you'll be able to help people go through the healing process and to keep from exploiting their trauma in a way that's kind of coming off that it might be benefiting you or your organization. So values, obviously, you want to do no harm, recognize what that means. The person in front of you that's experienced this traumatic event, you want to not do anything, say anything that's going to cause more harm. Be competent, committed. Be competent in learning more about trauma. If you don't know what trauma is, learn more about trauma-informed care. This is obviously just a brief introduction, but there is definitely more that you could learn about. Make it clear to a person that you are there for them. And there are several different ways that you could possibly do that. One is just by going into their space. Sometimes you might want people to come to where you are. So maybe like right now, obviously with COVID, but figuring out a way where you can go into their space or the space that they feel safest, instead of saying, come to the church and talk to me, especially again for things that might, if an event happened at the church that they're not comfortable doing. Assume their goodwill. That's really, just assume that that a person that is in the healing process really do want to heal, and they're really doing the best that they can with the information and the skills that they have, without just saying to them, you don't want to get better because you don't want to do what I want you to do, or you don't want to do these things that I think are going to be helpful. And also, don't rush to judge them. Don't rush to judge the situation. And then keep their agenda in focus. Again, their healing is about them, not about you and what you think is best for that person. And this is for, again, this is from across the board, not just within the faith community. Empathy. Empathy is not necessarily always talked about as often. So empathy, what I'm saying empathy here is learning how to be committed to the work and understanding the point of view of a person that you are communicating with, and being able to communicate your understanding of that person. So again, asking questions, asking them if what you're thinking is aligned with what they're saying, and so being able to again express that you understand them in a way that they can understand. Be committed to understanding the individuals in and through the context of their lives. So not only just being focused on what happened to them, you have to understand kind of their whole life and why this situation may be more impactful than other situations, or how this situation, they may have responded in a different way than they responded to another trauma. With elderly, they've had a lot of years of life, and so you might assume that because they are older that they can handle it and they've lived this long, and that's not necessarily the case. And so don't make assumptions. So really try to understand a person throughout their history of their lives. Be committed to being non-judgmental and taking an active interest in the individual's concerns, healing, and growth. Again, that comes from asking questions about what they need, not what you think that they need, and just really being there and listening sometimes without telling them what to do. Genuineness, again, don't overemphasize your role as a provider or as the minister. Sometimes, again, that might come off as you know everything, and that person may not feel comfortable then opening up. So you want to just kind of not necessarily make yourself be the person that knows all the information. This is that person's experience. And so you don't want to be like, well, this is, again, I know more because I'm the pastor of the church, or I'm the, lead social worker, or whatever the case may be. And avoid becoming defensive. Sometimes when people have experienced a trauma, they might not remember certain details, or they might, again, it just changes them. And so they might not know how to communicate the way that they used to, and they might say something that could be hurtful. And so try not to internalize that as it's something being about you, unless you intentionally, or, just ask, is there something that I said or did, or again, how can I say something in a way that would be helpful versus hurtful to you? I always say helpful and hurtful versus good and bad, because helpful and hurtful can mean different things to different people. Good and bad implies judgment, I think, sometimes, and that something is wrong with you or wrong with the person. Empowerment is another value. So how can you empower individuals that have experienced trauma? Again, just help the individual identify, develop, and use resources that will be helpful in their healing. Again, sometimes in the faith community, churches will only say that they are the only resource that the person should use. And I think that can be, again, hurtful or even damaging, not encouraging people to go through the other organizations or social services that they may need to help with their healing. So learning that, knowing that what's available in the community, so that you can help guide people who may not know. Help them recognize their worth. Very important, because again, trauma experiences sometimes will cause a person to, if they had a sense of self-worth, then trauma can actually challenge that and maybe take that away from them. So helping them rebuild their worth as best as you can. Again, figuring out what you need to do. Share in the helping process with them. Again, if you're going to be involved and help them. This is not going to be only sometimes when things are easiest for you to do it, or maybe when somebody's looking. I know sometimes faith leaders will say, oh, I'm gonna be helpful because somebody's paying attention. But if nobody's paying attention, if it's really in you to be helpful, then be helpful. And of course, don't always just assume that a person's overly fragile. Help them identify their strengths and figure out how their strengths can be useful in guiding them through this journey. It's a long, long journey. So those are some things that you can do to empower. Excuse me. Now, I'm going to use this teacher. This comes from a book, Mental Health in the Church. And so if you are in faith community, or you have a church, or you go to church, these are some things you can encourage your own church or congregation to do. Assemble a team of people who want to be maybe like a kind of a responsive team, like when things happen to people within the church or within the community, that can go out and be actively involved in helping build that faith and that hope and that healing. So seek volunteers, train them up, give them information about how to do that in an effective way that's going to be helpful and less hurtful. Focus on ministry activities most essential for spiritual growth. So this is interesting. In my work with Mother Emanuel Empowerment Center, mental health was a word that nobody really wanted to mention. So we came up with different activities that would promote resiliency without using the word mental health, and sometimes without even using the word trauma, because that word in itself, people just had a very difficult time with. So it would be things like, oh, let's have a soul spa day. Let's just have an overall wellness series. So figuring out in your congregation or within your organization how you can do that to promote spiritual growth. And connection to that person's religious backgrounds or spiritual background. Communicate effectively. Communicate effectively is really talking about that these things happen regularly. If the church is not talking about trauma, things like domestic violence, things like elderly abuse, things like human trafficking on a regular, and then when these things happen, people don't feel like they can go to the church because it's not something that's openly discussed. So making it a part of just your church culture to address these things. It also might help people be more willing to talk about things that they see within their community, or maybe that they see within the church that's happening, if it's something that's discussed. Offer education and support. So figure out a way that within your faith community you can offer education and support. And again, there's no one way to do this. You want to do it in ways that can reach all types of age groups within your church. Again, some people might be like want to receive information via social media or electronically. Some people still like to read paper products, and some people like to do things in person. So figuring that way out. With COVID, obviously you want to now figure out a better way to do that based off of your age group, what they want. And so just simply asking them, sending out, maybe a letter saying, how would you like to receive this education and support, especially during the time of COVID. And respect their journey. Again, this is their journey. There's not necessarily, there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to go through this journey. And so you want to be part of the process of helping them be part of their journey. That's the healthy part, not the unhealthy part. And again, the ways to do that are just simply following along with some of these values, knowing about trauma, knowing about trauma-informed care. And I know we're short on time, so the last part I want to say is the ultimate way to be part of a person's faith, hope, and healing is for you to and take care of yourself. Self-care is something that's very important. Self-care involves you learning how to address your own vicarious trauma, your own history of pain and suffering, because that can impact how you choose to engage with other people. Sometimes seeing and hearing about other people's traumatic events can impact you. So knowing those signs and symptoms of what that looks like and how to address that are going to be important. That's a whole nother training. Learn how to attend to your own emotions, thoughts, and physical sensations that you may be experiencing as you're hearing things, seeing things. Just know that every time, be mindful of I like to call it trauma porn, where you choose to watch an event on social media or on the news that's showing somebody, like somebody died. That can in itself cause vicarious trauma on you, or even just traumatic experiences for yourself. So being mindful of what you choose to watch and engage in. Take care of yourself. Breathe. Learn how to breathe. Breathing is the best way and the easiest and simplest way to kind of just slow your mind down from racing thoughts and just take slow breaths. I encourage people to do this. If you are not used to doing it all day throughout the day, set an alarm to go off on your phone like every hour, where you just take 5 to 10 slow, intentional breaths in and out. And so I have harmony here because a lot of people talk about balance. Balance, I don't think really works because everything can't equal the same amount of time and energy. So harmony is really learning how to be in the present moment and doing what's important in that moment. So it's about quality. So paying attention to what you're doing versus feeling like, okay, I'm doing this, but I'm also thinking about this other person I need to go see. So learning how to just do the things that's needed without necessarily trying to do everything in a week or in a day that doesn't necessarily fit. it's kind of like listening to music. You know, sometimes the clarinet might play a little louder than the trumpet. And so that's how you have to figure out the things that you need to do for yourself professionally and with your home life and personal life. Self-compassion. This is you being your own best friend. It's so easy for providers and faith people in the community to give all these words of wisdom to other people. Learning how to do that for yourself, looking in the mirror and saying, you know, I'm really, you know, a great person, or yes, I didn't say that the best way I intended to say it, and so it's okay. I know I've learned my lesson. I can do something different. So being able to be a champion for yourself, not just for other people. And then, of course, making sure you're sleeping, because this work is, you know, unfortunately, there's something that's always happening. And so making sure you're getting adequate rest, eating when you need to eat, hydrating as much as possible. And if you can, exercise. Exercise doesn't have to be anything rigorous. You can do it where you are. So there's so many different things that you can do. So self-care, very important. Which brings me to the Q&A. Again, I don't know how much time we had. I know I went through that pretty quickly because I really wanted to cover a lot of it. So right at this point, I think I'll take some questions. And
Tenelle, we had one question from LaQuanda Washington. LaQuanda, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? It was about PTSD. Well, I will ask. I don't know if LaQuanda can unmute herself, but LaQuanda wanted to know, is trauma the main cause of PTSD?
Yes, it is. You cannot diagnose PTSD without there being some type of traumatic experience that includes actual threat to a person's life, physical, sexual, again, witnessing or hearing, sometimes hearing about like somebody hearing about the death or murder of someone, again, accidents, hurricanes and earthquakes, all those different things can be classified as traumatic events.
I will ask one other question that I'm sure everybody wants to know. Everybody's presentations or PowerPoints were so phenomenal, and I'm sure it's just a matter of time before all of the chat fills up with, can I have Tim's presentation? Can I have a copy of Tenelle's presentation? Can I have a copy of Megan's presentation? So before the chat fills up, I will ask the question of everybody. Would you be willing to share your PowerPoints with us so we can distribute them to the attendees? Tenelle, I see you're unmuted, or will we be allowed to share?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And Tim,
Not a problem for me.
Sorry.
Tim, would we be able to share your
Absolutely, no problem.
and Miss Megan?
I may need to get approval for that, so I'll get back to you on it.
Okay, you'll get back to us, because the presentation was wonderful. I'm sure everybody will be, I mean, I was writing numbers, and I know Tim has already had to give his numbers about follow-ups. I know we're running out of time, but if everybody can hang around, because Roger, are we going to get to hear from you?
I'm trying to be respectful. So if you, and as Tenelle was wrapping up, I was dropping bits of information. I've dropped another thing in there. What I've given you guys are the resources that I was going to talk about. The key things I wanted to make a comment on, and I think it's really the heart that keeps coming up in all y'all's messages today. You guys got to keep talking to those that you care for. If you're in the social work or caregiver side, you got to keep up with them, because COVID has changed everything. We don't get a natural flowing, safe settings for talking with folks, especially our senior adults. And like Tim said, unfortunately, the not so good people, the bad people, are making the connections and following through and changing their lives horrifically. So let's get the good people connecting with them just as frequently. And that may take a little extra effort. I was going to ask a question. Do you use text? How do you connect with folks? Please don't just text them and feel good about that. Please call them. If you have members of your faith, set up a program that I'm thinking that's happened for some churches. Set up a new concept of follow-up for your members during COVID. I know we've got more going back out, but we need to keep working harder to connect. That's where the dangers are falling. We've lost, even I was thinking about it in senior care. My mom's in one of the senior care areas, and they were telling me, of course, one of the best blessings was all the volunteers who were also seniors coming in. And those are eyes and ears seeing if there's things that need to be done and extra care and accountability. I've shot out several resources that also give you opportunities to understand how to prepare and how to work. But the best thing I can tell you, please, please don't do anything that's going to put you in harm. Partner with your sheriff's office, partner with your police department, partner with your victim service folks. They're trained in this part. Even as you were hearing from Tenelle, all that you heard a lot, but you are not experts now. You still need these folks when it comes to the crisis point of care for these elders. And the other thing for me too is we have to keep talking also as leaders, also as influencers, because there's too many best kept secrets of resources like you just learned today. In fact, Tim, I need you to tell them one more that you didn't tell. That's a really important resource. Tell them that they have permission about that opportunity when they think something's wrong at a senior adult's home. It's not a problem to send a police officer and have nothing be wrong. What is that principle? You said to me earlier.
Well, it's just requesting a welfare check.
That's it, welfare check. Describe that.
That is out there. I don't know why I feel I should say it should not be abused, because I've really not known it to be. But it's basically an opportunity. If you feel something is not right, and there maybe is not family members or friends you could call, or church members or friends, call 911 and request a welfare check. Okay, you may be questioned by the 911 operator as far as the parameters of, you know, what your concerns are, etc. But they'll dispatch a deputy, or depending on the jurisdiction you're in, and they'll knock on the door and do a welfare check. Police, the nice thing about that, police cannot just knock on the door and say, oh, well, and walk away. You know, that is a responsibility we have to make sure they're okay.
Right. And that, again, puts you in you as a faith leader, you as a social worker, you as a victim advocate. If you're not, you know, if you've got someone from, you know, the people that you're working with, the partnership that we have here makes it a safer setting for everybody. But we've got to start knocking on that door. And I know this is COVID time. I know I don't have one nearby me, but in my car, I have a ton of masks. And my wife gets frustrated when she sometimes walks out and forgets the mask. But we can be safe. My chaplain work has me essential. But we've got to get out there and connect. So again, this is the game changer on what we've got going on right now. This is a big issue. This is not something that isn't happening in your town or your church or your area of service. It's just not being talked about, or it's not being found out about. So yeah, I'm sorry, my heart's aching right now because there's so much more. But again, this is the starting point. I pray that you all keep up with this. These are literally, you've had 3 talks that could be full 2-hour talks themselves.
Just a little thing about language. When we talk about welfare check, it's a check. The person is checking on the senior's welfare. I know that there are a lot of social workers out there, but for the faith community, it is not a welfare check, meaning the Department of Social Services with a check that has to do with money. Because when you say welfare checks, to some people that connotes one thing, to social workers, and it connotes something else. So just to be clear, that we're talking about the welfare check that's checking on a person's welfare. It has nothing to do with money or social services, nothing whatsoever to do with that, just to be clear. Same term, but the pause is very important.
No money, just care. Just care.
You're trying to get me fired, aren't you, Kay?
I just wanted to be sure, because I know we have in our audience, there are people from different communities, and I just wanted to be sure that people heard the correct checking on somebody's welfare, as opposed to, you know, I heard Tim said that they were giving out welfare checks.
By the way, if you haven't done this, audience, if you have not made a connection with a victim advocate in your community before the storm of an issue, do it today. Make that partnership now. I know we're in storms, but it's not going to be as bad as it's the storm of when you suddenly have that person in your service of care or your faith community. You need to have that partnership now. Same with your SCVASAs, all the different agencies that work under SCVASA that are connected all through our communities, like Sexual Trauma Services here, or Julie Valentine Center up in the upstate, PAR on the coast. And there's projects and plans for faith strategies with all these folks. So again, we're talking a tune that's constant. But again, I feel like it's the best kept secret. So please, and if you have any trouble finding who to talk to, ask any one of us. Call me, call Tim, call any of us. We've got eyes and ears too that we can help you with if we're not in your town or need help in your town. Okay, Rachel, what else? What else can we do?
Well,
We just don't want to leave them not being able to do better than what they started when they listened to the beginning of this webinar.
I think we've gotten excellent information today, and I can send out any information we'd like sent out to the attendees from today's webinar. And if anyone has any specific questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to info@screspitcoalition.org, and I can route your questions to the appropriate panelists, or you can email me at rachal@screspitcoalition.org, and I'll be happy to send you information from today's webinar. This webinar was also recorded and will be put on our website at a future date. And we also have 2 more webinars upcoming in the Faith and Caregiving Symposium 2020. That'll be next week, a caregiver panel with caregivers from across the lifespan talking about their joys and difficulties. And we'll also be joined by Anita Atwood and Jennifer Bruton from the South Carolina Department on Aging. And I'll also be talking about the Respite Coalition and respite in general. Our last panel will be on the 29th, and that will be with Dr. Rachel Brown from Prisma Health, talking about overcoming burnout, and that is geared specifically to direct care professionals. So we thank you again for attending the webinar today, and a special thank you to all of our panelists for this excellent information that you've shared with all of us about faith communities and how we can help individuals avoid exploitation. So thank you so much, and I will at this point call our webinar today to a close. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, panelists, stick around for just a minute.
Okay.
Thank y'all.
You're welcome.
All right.
So I think I can stop recording at this point.